Hello, everyone. Welcome to the C45 Quality Association's webinar on compositional formulation requirements for different classes of cannabis. I'm going to share my screen so we all have the presentation that we'll be going through at the same time. Okay. Bridget, can you see my screen? Perfect. Okay.
Yes, I can.
So pardon me?
Yeah, it looks good. Go for it.
Okay, perfect. I can't see my screen. I'm sorry, I can't see my screen, so I have to find a way to see my screen. Okay. All right, so please note that this webinar is being recorded for future reference, review, quality assurance purposes. And once again, welcome everyone to our webinar on composition requirements for different classes of cannabis. This webinar has been organized by the C45 Quality Association, and I want to give a brief overview of this association. It is a non-profit organization. It's backed by membership, so thank you all for being amazing members. And the C45 Quality Association does represent the brightest minds in quality, regulatory, and laboratory testing within the Canadian legal cannabis space. So we have a passion for progress and reasonable regulations. We are kind of a liaison between the industry and regulatory bodies, lobbying for change, which is our passion, make sure that everything works well for all the stakeholders in the industry. We also want to work with everyone to establish industry best practices and provide feedback to both federal and provincial regulators. So if you are here today and you're not a member, we will encourage you to join our association and you won't regret it. You're going to reap enormous benefits by being a member of the C45 Quality Association. Our scope for today is we are going to talk about the requirements when it comes to formulation, when it comes to production, when it comes to composition of cannabis products. And we are focusing mostly on part 6 of the cannabis regulations. So the general restrictions, we all know Health Canada has a lot of restrictions when it comes to promotions and appeal of cannabis products to young people. So in this case, we don't expect any cannabis product to have an appearance, shape, or any other sensory characteristic or attributes or function that may appeal to young people. Cannabis in general also must not contain nicotine, caffeine, unless the caffeine is naturally occurring in the ingredients at a maximum level. We'll talk about that later in this webinar. And also, cannabis must not contain ethyl alcohol, with a few exceptions that we'll also discuss along the line. So for cannabis products, the usage is also restricted. And I always say that the biggest concern for Health Canada is the protection of public health. So all these regulations, the restrictions, etc., are geared towards protecting the health of the public, making sure that consumers are not adversely affected when it comes to the usage or consumption of any cannabis product. So in general, all cannabis products must not be intended for use around the eye. So nowhere near the eyelid, eyeball, eyebrows, eyelash, etc. Cannabis products cannot also be used on broken or damaged skin and cannot be used in a way that penetrates the skin barrier. So through injections, intravenous infusion, abrasives, etc. Those are restrictions on how cannabis can be used. So we are going to one class of cannabis, that's the edible cannabis, and we are going to discuss the restrictions when it comes to formulating ingredients, product properties or characteristics for edible cannabis. So when we are considering ingredients that we want to use to make our edible cannabis, we have to make sure that foods that are described in temporary marketing authorization letters are not used as ingredients. There's a prohibition on the usage of those foods. And we also have to make sure that when we make the food or the edible cannabis, we don't market it or promote it or represent it in a way that gives a false assurance of any health benefits related to the food. For example, if people are looking for weight loss products, edibles cannot be marketed as useful for appetite control or for weight loss. So that's one thing that we also have to be mindful of. Edible cannabis cannot contain ingredients other than food or food additives. And when we talk about food or food additives, it's clearly defined in the Food and Drugs regulations, the regulations of the FDA. And edible cannabis must be safe, as I've already mentioned. Edible cannabis must be safe for the consumers and not create any adverse reaction to the intended consumers. It must not have any poisonous or harmful substance. It must not be considered unfit for use. It must not be adulterated, and it must not be filthy, putrid, disgusting, rotten, decomposed. Anything that we on a normal day cannot consume as food cannot be portrayed as edible cannabis for consumption. And for packaging as well, for the immediate container, we are allowed to have multiple discrete units in an edible container, as long as the THC in the container, the total THC in the container does not exceed 10 milligrams. And those multiple units must be identical in their characteristics. When it comes to potency, when it comes to ingredients, the only exemption here is ingredients that are flavors or colors. So immediate containers can have multiple discrete units as long as all their properties are the same except for flavor or color. And with the use of food additives, we have to make sure that if you are using food additives, they are not a subject, they do not contain anything that is referred to in item 1 or 3 of the Cannabis Act, of Schedule 1 of the Cannabis Act. So when item 1 is any part of a cannabis plant, including the phytocannabinoids produced by or found in such a plant, regardless of whether that part has been processed or not. And item 3 is any substance that is derived, any substance that is identical to any phytocannabinoids produced by or found in such a plant, regardless of how the substance was obtained. And then food additives can also be used as ingredients if the marketing authorization permits that food additive to be added to food. And another condition is making sure that all the permits and the conditions under which the permits are allowed are met, including maximum levels of use. Another ingredient, food additives that can be used as ingredients is any additive that is not caffeine, that does not contain caffeine or is not caffeine citrate. There is a link at the end of this presentation that provides access to the list of permitted food additives to determine the limits and conditions of use of these food additives in edible cannabis. Other restrictions for edible cannabis: they cannot be fortified with vitamins or mineral nutrients. However, vitamins and mineral nutrients may only be used as ingredients if they are required or there is a regulatory permission for them to be used as food additives, and they are used in accordance with relevant rules and limitations for those food additives. And in this case, the vitamins and minerals must be naturally occurring in the ingredient that is intended to be used in the formulation of the edible cannabis. And the food used as an ingredient with the vitamins and minerals, in the food used as ingredients with vitamins and minerals, is required or permitted to be fortified with those vitamins and minerals. For example, in flour, there is a mandatory requirement to add thiamine to flour. So that's vitamins and mineral nutrients composition for edible cannabis. Caffeine also cannot be present in edible cannabis. However, if the caffeine is naturally present in ingredients that are used for the manufacture of edible cannabis, they can be allowed, but the concentration must not exceed 30 milligrams per immediate container. Ethyl alcohol is also the same. They can be present in edible cannabis only if its concentration does not exceed 5% per immediate container. Protein-based edible cannabis. So when it comes to meat, poultry, beef, fish, etc., they cannot be used for edible cannabis unless it is a food additive, for example, gelatin, and it is required to meet the formulation target. Meat, poultry, and poultry, fish, beef, etc. products also must have a water activity of 0.85 at 22 degrees Celsius when it is obtained by the license holder. So with this said, any meat, poultry, or fish product that an LP intends to use to make edible cannabis cannot be produced by the license holder. The license holder must purchase the meat, poultry, fish, etc., from a producer who has been licensed to produce such products under the Safe Food for Canadians Act, and also in accordance with the Cannabis Act. License holders are allowed to produce their own food. So anything that is not a meat product, poultry, fish, etc., can be produced by the license holder. But when it comes to meat, fish, poultry, beef, etc., they have to be received from another producer who is licensed under the Safe Food for Canadians Act. And once the license holder decides to make their own food, which are not meat products, poultry, fish, etc., they should ensure that the sale of the food would not be prohibited under the FDA. Edible cannabis cannot be irradiated unless it falls within the list that are provided in item 3 or 4 of column 1 of the Food and Drugs Regulations. And this list is basically wheat flour, whole wheat flour, spices, and seasonings. So if the edible cannabis that the license holder is producing is not one of these kind of products, they cannot be irradiated. We are also not allowed to produce edible cannabis that requires refrigeration after opening the immediate container. So we should make sure that the edible cannabis is shelf stable and will not require refrigeration at temperatures, will not require storage at temperatures below 4 degrees. We cannot sell edible cannabis in hermetically sealed containers. And in this case, this applies to all the child-resistant packages that we are required to have to package all classes of cannabis. So we cannot sell edible cannabis in such packages if the pH exceeds 4%, 4.6, and the water activity also exceeds 0.85 at a temperature of 22 plus or minus 2 degrees. There are exceptions for this clause unless the edible cannabis is a beverage. Restrictions for cannabis seeds. So for cannabis seeds, it's pretty straightforward. Health Canada just doesn't want pesticides on the cannabis seeds. And if any pesticides are applied on the cannabis seeds, they must be permitted for use based on the Pest Control Products Act, and the residues after use should not exceed the limits that Health Canada has established for that specific pesticide. So cannabis seeds is just straightforward. We are mandated to test cannabis seed products for pesticides before we sell them or make them available for distribution. For dried cannabis, it's also pretty straightforward. Dried cannabis is just that, dried cannabis. Health Canada does not expect us to add anything to dried cannabis and still term that product as dried cannabis. Dried cannabis must not have THCA, must not have extract, must not have other ingredients, etc., unless we are going to change the classification of the final product. But if it remains dried cannabis, it must have only dried cannabis, nothing else. Restrictions for cannabis extracts and topicals. Cannabis extracts and topicals are not allowed to have anything that may cause injury to the health of the user when the cannabis product is used as intended or reasonably foreseeably intended. The THC quantity, we all know this, must not, in a retail unit or immediate container, must not exceed 10,000 milligrams. There are no limitations on how much CBD can be in a retail unit, but the CBD concentration must be reported on the product label of these cannabis extracts or topicals. For the formulation of cannabis topicals, Health Canada does recommend reference to the cosmetic ingredient hot list to confirm topical ingredients that are safe for use by the end user. So before we make any topical formulations, we should consult the list. This list, a link to this list has been provided in this webinar at the end of the webinar. So it gives clarity on what is allowed, what is not allowed to be used to formulate cannabis topicals. And for cannabis topicals and extracts, we are required to ensure that cannabinoids and terpenes are distributed homogeneously in the entire batch in the product. So they should be uniform. When we pick one portion of a batch of cannabis extract, it should not contain more THC or more terpenes than another part of that batch that we pick. They should be very similar and homogeneous. And if the extracts and topicals are in discrete units, the properties of each unit, including the size, but excluding flavor and color must be consistent. So similar to the edible cannabis, we can have extracts and topicals with different flavors and colors in the same retail units, but the ingredients must be the same, the properties must be the same, the size must be the same. They must be consistent across board. For cannabis extracts, there are restrictions on the ingredients that we can use to make cannabis extracts. And Health Canada expects all cannabis extracts to only contain ingredients that are useful as carrier substances, that are there as flavoring agents, or that are required in the cannabis extract to maintain the quality or stability of the final cannabis products. Vitamins can be added if it is needed to maintain the quality or stability, but it must be used in an amount that does not exceed what is necessary to do so. Restrictions for cannabis extracts. We also have to make sure that cannabis extracts do not contain any ingredients that are mineral nutrients, taurine, probiotics, gluconolactone, amino acids, essential fatty acids, coloring agents, caffeine, nicotine, sugar, sweetness, or sweetening agents. Any of these prohibited substances may be present in an ingredient that is used to produce the cannabis extract, as long as these items occur naturally in the ingredient and is not present above the naturally occurring level for that ingredient. So, for example, if you are using coffee beans, we know coffee beans naturally contain caffeine. So if we pick the caffeine, and there's research that says that there should not be more than 10 milligram of caffeine in 10 gram of coffee beans, we shouldn't expect the coffee beans to have 100 milligram of caffeine in the 10 gram of coffee beans. It should be naturally occurring and should not be more than what the normal levels are for that ingredient. Cannabis extracts intended for ingestion may contain ethyl alcohol at any concentration if the net weight of the cannabis extract in each immediate container does not exceed 7.5 grams. That's only if the extract is intended for ingestion. For inhalation, ingredients other than flavoring agents, for which there is a standard in a publication referred to in Schedule B of the FDA. That's where we find all our pharmacopoeia our pharmacopoeia publications that we usually use for determining release criteria or specifications. And those ingredients have to comply with the standard. So in the European Pharmacopoeia, for example, there is a whole there are numerous pages dedicated to general monographs. Some of these monographs refer to essential oils, etc. So if some of these ingredients have to be used, we have to make sure that they belong in a pharmacopoeia and there is a standard for these ingredients. And those standards are also met when we use those ingredients to formulate extracts. Yes, and cannabis extracts cannot be used on the skin. So including the hair, the nails, or any part of the skin, cannabis extracts cannot be projected as intended for use on skin. Those are reserved for cannabis topicals. So for quantity of THC per discrete unit for extracts that are intended for ingestion, nasal, rectal, or vaginal use, there should be at most 10 milligrams of THC per activation. And this activation is based on the tools that are being used, is based on testing that has been performed on these cannabis extracts to confirm that truly, when it is used as intended, there is no more than 10 milligram THC per activation or per use. So the immediate container of the cannabis extracts that are not in discrete units and not intended for inhalation must also have the appropriate dispensing mechanism. For example, a pump, spray bottle, whatever. That also ensures that no more than 10 milligram is activated at any given time when we want to use the cannabis. And for cannabis extracts that are in liquid form, the immediate container cannot exceed 90 ml for the net weight. Cannabis accessories and their restrictions. So cannabis accessories, we all know, there are two materials that are essential for the usage of cannabis. They include pre-roll papers, pipes, bongs, vaping cartridges, etc. Any cannabis accessory that contains cannabis is considered a cannabis product. And however, they are not considered as immediate containers. They are together with the cannabis, they are considered as cannabis products. And they are further on packaged into immediate containers to become a cannabis product that's available for retail sale. In general, a cannabis accessory must not be contaminated. It must be safe for use. It must not impart any characterizing flavor to the cannabis. So it should not add on as an ingredient to any cannabis product. And it must also not dispense more than 10 milligram of THC per activation as described previously for cannabis extracts intended for use as inhalation, not intended for use as inhalation. Yes. For novel cannabis products, we are all in this industry. We are always researching. We are trying to come up with innovative ideas, new products that meet consumer demands and consumer preferences. For all novel products, we all must ensure that they will not be injurious to public health or they are not poisonous. They do not contain any harmful ingredients. They are not adulterated. But Health Canada makes the ultimate decision of approving novel cannabis products. So we are all mandated to report through the notice of new cannabis products to Health Canada for all novel cannabis products that we intend to bring to the market. Most importantly, with public health and safety in mind. That brings us to the end of our webinar today. So in conclusion, we have talked about specific requirements for each class of cannabis, also based on the intended use or reasonably foreseeable use of the cannabis. There are restrictions on the ingredients, potency, product properties, packaging, etc., with the sole aim of protecting public health. And if any of us are unsure about what the regulations are, there are a lot of resources available to provide much more clarity when it comes to the composition requirements of cannabis and cannabis products. Here are some references or sources of information that we can use to dive deeper into this webinar that we just participated in. And thank you all for your attention. If anyone has any question on or comments or feedback, we are very open. Okay, so I do have one open question here from Ryan. Thank you, Ryan. He's asking who determines which shapes and colors are appealing to children and which are not. The line is too blurred to understand which products are compliant when commercializing. You are very right, Ryan, and mostly it's Health Canada who has the final say. And I know there's been a few LPs who have had some discussions with Health Canada because they understood appeal to children differently. But ultimately, it's Health Canada who makes that final decision as to what shape or color is appealing to children or not. Can cannabis extracts be irradiated? There are no restrictions on irradiation when it comes to cannabis extract. The regulations have not mentioned anything about restrictions when it comes to irradiation of cannabis extract. So yes, the only restrictions there are related to edible cannabis for irradiation. Are there any other questions from the team so we can address these? Okay, if there are no questions, I would ask our host Bridget to come online, and we will definitely share this slide with everyone who joined us today. Thank you for showing up. We appreciate you all. And if you're not a member, please remember to join the C45 Quality Association. Thank you.
There is one more question if you want to answer it.
Yes, so there's one question. Oh, two. So Rian said she had a disagreement with their head of operations in regards to release analysis of inhalable cars with terpene additives. I believe there should be potency and terpene analysis, but he thinks only cannabinoids are required. To be honest, if terpenes are added to the final product, terpenes must be tested for because the cannabis regs require uniform distribution of both cannabinoids and terpenes in cannabis extracts and topicals. Mohammed also is saying why pH should be less than 4.6 in canning cannabis. Because when the pH is less, it's more acidic and there is very little chance for microorganisms that cause botulism to grow or create the toxins that can cause diseases or adverse reactions in the consumers. That's why Health Canada established that tolerance limit or threshold. There's another question. Do you see any issues with using reishi spore oil as a carrier oil? I don't know if Bridget has any information on this, but to be honest, this is my first time seeing reishi spore oil. I can't comment on that. I'm sorry, Karen.
Yeah, neither can I. I don't know.
Okay.
Okay. Well, if there's no more questions, I guess we wrap up today's webinar. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending. And this will be available on our YouTube channel as a live event to watch. And we'll also post the slides on the members portal at the C45 Wild Apricot system. All right. Have a good one. Thanks, Nina. Great job.
Okay. Hey, everyone.